Welcome back, everybody, to this week's episode of Enough. So glad to be back with you guys and joined by a special guest, my brother, Lucas Paris. Lucas, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. It really is a pleasure,
Oh, yeah. Lucas has been trying to get on. Well, we've been trying to get Lucas on the show for a little bit now to talk about this idea of culture.
It's hard to lock me down.
Yeah, it is. You're busy man, busy schedule. Had to talk to his people, and send our people talk to his. But not necessarily the idea of culture as in ethnicities and stuff like that, but kind of a broader organizational culture, if that makes sense. And we'll develop this idea as we go further on. So just kind of in preparation, we looked up the definition of culture. So Google states that culture is the customs, arts, social institutions, and achievements of a particular nation, people, or other social group. And so that's kind of where we based it off. And for our purposes, we created our own definition of culture for the church. And so our definition, as it stands right now, is how we as individuals in the church respond to the calling of a communal struggle towards Christ, right? So if that doesn't make sense, this comes out of the idea that we're all called individually to find Christ. And how we do that is through the communal efforts of the church. And so we see this everywhere in the Bible. We see it in Corinthians, where it says, be imitators of me as I am of Christ. We see it in John 15, where it says, if you were of the world would love you as its own, but because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you, right? So saying, take whatever comes at you and just know that you are led by God. We see this in Luke a little bit, maybe subtly, for life is more than food and the body more than clothing, right? There's more to what we're trying to do here. It's not all fun and games. It's not all pleasures. It's truly more than this. It's seeking the kingdom, right? And so today we wanted to talk about that and kind of bring in some life experiences and maybe talk about maybe why we don't necessarily see great cultures in our churches today. So come join the conversation, drop comments in the discussion or drop, comments down below if something strikes you or you want to bounce an idea off us, and we'll happy to respond. But Stav, do you want to kind of take this idea and kind of run with it?
Yeah, I mean, do you want to can you read that definition one more time? The one we made up?
Yeah. So our definition is how we as individuals in the church respond to the calling of a communal struggle towards Christ.
So yeah, I really like, so that last part, like a communal struggle. I really like that because I think everyone recently in the church, and actually not recently, but probably forever, has kind of struggled with that meaning of, okay, what am I supposed to do as an Orthodox Christian? And I think we get caught up with okay, I'm not doing exactly what I should be doing, and maybe that person is, I'm not as good as them or something like that. And it kind of messes with the culture, with the community.
Mm-hmm.
And what Christ says, we're supposed to imitate him as Orthodox Christians. And for our culture as an Orthodox culture,
Mm-hmm.
our goal is to have a relationship with God and to achieve that one with God. And we're called to live like him. We are called to love and to spread his word. And I think as time has gone on with what's gone on in the world and everything, and the distractions we have in our daily lives, I think it's kind of messed with the community of Orthodox Christians where we are together and we're trying to achieve the same goal. And I think we've gotten a little skewed with like putting our Greek, Russian, Antiochian culture maybe before our Orthodox culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think kids really, or parents or adults really look at it that way, because it's kind of been an ongoing thing. They look at it as I'm going to church, I'm maybe praying sometimes, I might be going to confession, but they're really not doing what God has been calling us to do. And personally, like, I'm not calling out anyone. I do the exact same thing. We all do the exact same thing. But
yeah,
I think that's a struggle that our Orthodox community as a culture, as an Orthodox culture, has really kind of struggled with lately.
Yeah, I think that's a Very interesting point. And I think you're right. I think our idea of what being Orthodox is very skewed. I was in a meeting at the beginning of the summer, and we were talking about how our church is no longer, and this is just our specific parish, our church is no longer like a community church, but it's a commuter church. So that people don't, what that means, like people aren't living near the church anymore. And, there's many reasons for that, jobs, just maybe the area is not great, stuff like that. But it kind of struck me as like, oh, like, I would love to live right by the church, that I can kind of go into the church, just light a candle or something, pray something like that, just because that's kind of where I am. I would love to just go and go in and out. And that's how like cities used to be built. They used to be built around the churches, so that everything revolves around it. And it just, that came to mind as you were saying that it's kind of skewed. And kind of going off this point, and Luke, maybe you can answer this. What do you think we kind of need to remember to as individuals to then kind of spark a communal shift in culture, if that makes sense? Like what do you think we really need to do as individuals to kind of reignite this flame to living true orthodoxy?
Yeah, that's a great thing right there. I think the very first thing we need to recognize is we need to like blatantly recognize that ourselves and accept the fact, like, I am an Orthodox Christian, right? This is my identity. This is how I describe myself, right?
Yeah.
And I think one thing that we really haven't been focusing on is, we talked about like, yeah, like there's a lot of people in our church, and us, like, I know there's definitely been times in my life where I go to church on Sundays, or maybe there's other people like they only go like once a year, but it's not. And sometimes we think that's enough, and sometimes we're like, hey, like I'm there, right? But I feel like it needs to be a little bit more than that. So like simply showing up for liturgy just isn't going to cut it. I need to be prepared. There's been times in my life where like you go up to communion, you approach the chalice, you take communion at the end of the day, and it's just like kind of transactional in a way. It's just like going through the motions. It's something I've been doing my whole life, and we need to come to the realization that like this is something more than that. This is literally like the body of Christ, like living inside of us for this moment. And I think like from that realization, there's this idea that I really like, and it's the idea of like taking the liturgy after the liturgy, like the liturgy after the liturgy. And it's saying that we need to fully buy into the process. We need to truly believe that like during Sundays or during a liturgy, like when I'm receiving the Eucharist, we need to truly believe like this is like we call it a sacrament for a reason. Like this is truly the body and blood of Christ. And it's taking that idea, accepting God's love, right? We need to embrace the liturgy. Like it's the literal manifestation of heaven and earth. The liturgy is the one place where the heaven and earth collide. And it's such a beautiful thing. And we need to take all of that love and all of that beauty and all of the soul warming aspects that come with being a part of like the liturgy and the church. And we need to take that one step further, right? We need to prepare. We need to realize how important it is. And we as Orthodox Christians, we need to take that as outside of the walls of the church, right? The liturgy after the liturgy, we've just now prepared. We've just now realized how big of a deal this is. And we need to spread that joy. We need to wear our love for Christ on our sleeves. And we need to just like give it to all the world to see. And, it's just like, even if that means sacrificing aspects of our worldly life too. Like one of the quotes you said is from John, right? If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you, right? It's just the idea of people, like even if you do have to sacrifice those things, you're sacrificing it because of your love for Christ, and it's truly a good thing, right? Because we see sacrifice as such as like negative thing, and I know you guys have talked about before, but it truly is like the heart of the church, right?
Yeah, I love it. One of my favorite Bible verses, and I don't know where it's from, so maybe how is it your favorite Bible verse? You don't know where it's from, right? But it's greater love has none than this, than to lay down your life for your brother. And it's just it's very beautiful in how it's stated, but it's just kind of what you're saying. Sacrifice is present and it's necessary in the church. And it's interesting how you bring up liturgy after the liturgy. It kind of comes back to something we talked about. I don't know what episode, but we're talking about we have to live Eucharist to Eucharist. Everything in between, it's good, but those end caps of the Eucharist, that's where we need to be at in our hearts. and I'm not one to talk about that. I'm terrible at preparing for communion or going to church. But also like kind of jumping around here, like I've noticed that in the times where I have prepared and have taken communion, it's like after liturgies, I'm just kind of hanging out on Sundays. Those are the moments where I feel like I'm almost tempted the most. And I don't know if you guys have experienced that, but maybe it's like, I'm tempted the most because I'm close to Christ in that moment. Maybe, it's interesting to look at these moments and see, I get thrown off the path when I'm just 1 foot closer on the right path. I don't know. Stav, have you ever noticed that?
Oh yeah, plenty of times. I mean, and I think that's like the whole part of it is where like you're having such a great week, you're having great days, and then something happens and it's like, okay, how do you react to that? You're not gonna change your whole idea of thinking just because one bad thing happened. You gotta look at it, kind of assess it, and then go from there. And I think that's what's also one of the most special things about the church is it's a place where to go to for bad days like that. It's a place that you can, and it's Christ you can talk to when you've had bad days, or a priest you can go to. And that's one of the things that really sucked about COVID was everyone was going through bad days like every single day. And like our church here was locked. We couldn't even go to our church here to just walk in or light a candle or something, which really sucked. And like that's another culture thing we missed out on was our churches weren't present for us when we were going through these hard times last year. And like I'm sure the priest wanted them open. I'm sure your dad was like ripped apart about it, but it was hard. And I think we kind of like when those things happen, when we have our bad days, kids, parents, adults, we kind of jump back into what's comfortable in our lives and not want to go through the things that make us uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I think, sorry to interrupt you, but
no, you're good.
I think this is where like the culture comes in and the idea that we're trying to get. It's like, if we have a good culture of striving Christians, of struggling Christians, if the church mindset is one with Christ, this is where us as individuals can tap into the community.
Exactly.
And we can say, hey, these people are also trying. Like, let me go seek help from them, because the Christian life isn't meant to be alone. It's not. It just isn't. Like Christ had disciples. He was teaching. He wasn't just like a one-man show on the side of the road. No, he like brought his disciples and friends with him. And when they had bad days, he counseled them, maybe harshly, maybe he called them out, but this corrected them on the path. And this is what we need from the churches. And I think we can draw a really good analogy, just as like St. Paul always uses sports analogies and athletics. I think this is another great analogy to use. And, we've all been athletes. I've been on terrible teams in the past that are just the worst to be on. I hated being there. And maybe it was because the culture, it just wasn't there. There wasn't necessarily good leadership. And those that were the leaders, maybe they weren't in for the right reasons. But I've also been on really good teams where, we were winning and people loved being on. And so maybe it'd be cool to kind of talk about this. Lucas, I know you've been on this past year, or I guess the past few months, you played football and lacrosse and had two very different experiences. Maybe you want to kind of talk about that and how we can kind of relate this to the church.
You got it. Yeah, so I've like Nicholas said, I just played football, I just played lacrosse, and it was like COVID season, right? So everything in general was a little weird, it was a little off.
Yeah.
But I'll take my first example with football, and even amidst all of the pandemic and all of the craziness, we were able to have a season. And the very first two games we got back, they were shutouts, and like blowout shutouts too while we were at it. And then we continued the season. We ended it off 6-0, and we beat the two big Catholic schools, back to back. And it was this really big deal for our program and for our school in general. It was just amidst all of this craziness of pandemic and everything. But I mean, that the only reason that I can attribute any of the success to was really the culture that my football coaches and the team was like kind of building for us. And they my freshman year and sophomore year, we spent a lot of time like during the summers, like you have like your summer workouts, and then they'd send us into the room and they'd slap us down. We have lessons about our culture. And it was during those moments I didn't really like understand like why we're doing this, what's kind of like the bigger picture here. And it was just like me like spinning my pen, like sitting around kind of in one ear out the other. But some of the core covenants that we talked about and that they really stressed, where it was I'll focus on these three. It was the idea of brotherhood, accountability, and their favorite one was like this idea of being all in.
Mhm.
And I kept hearing all these things. I wasn't able to put a picture together until this last season, where I went from where like there was all this success and there was all of this camaraderie, and like we were kind of living up to these covenants that we've talked about all of like my like last few years playing the sport. And it was just kind of this like click in my head, like an understanding of like, okay, like this like culture is something that is really important.
Mhm.
And I kind of want to dig in a little more in those tenets we talked about, because I feel like you can draw some really like interesting conclusions from them. So the ones I pointed out were brotherhood, accountability, and being all in. And on the field, right, that means like brotherhood, like it's that sense of like, I will do anything for my teammates around me. That's like, I will pick you up when you're down. I will lay my life down for you. Like a band of brothers with a heart of fire. It's the line they really like to put on us. But if we look at that from it's funny because I'm reading each one of these. It's like all of these are Christ-like kind of ideas. So like brotherhood, I mean, that's loving your neighbor. That's like the golden rule, right? And then the next one would be accountability. And that's just kind of like a kind of like general blanket term right there. Like, oh, you have to be accountable. You have to know what you're doing. You have to know your plays. You have to be able to execute that in a way. But, and again, you can look at that like, it's a very like Christ-like thing, right? Taking responsibilities for our actions. And in a sense, like confessing our mistakes and saying, this was my fault, but getting up, you missed the mark, but you're going to keep going. You're going to work on the next play. And the last one, being all in, this was their favorite one. They would drive it into us and they put it on the back of our shirts. And they were like, okay, like you need to give your all to the team. Like it's like it's only 4 quarters, that type of stuff. And really just the idea of sacrificing everything you have, sacrificing on the line. And well, I mean, that is like the heart of the church, sacrifice right there. So I'm looking at all these covenants, all these things that like I could truly say were the reasons we were successful, and they're all Christ-like. They're all literally like the reasons we were successful is because even from a secular understanding, my coaches and the staff and everybody involved, they were having us buy into these ideas that were Christ-like. And it's just crazy to think about, because I would have just in one ear out the other, I never would have drawn any of these conclusions. But when I look back and I look at the success we had and I'm able to draw these conclusions, it really was because of like the fact that they modeled the program off the image of God, and it was just purely from like a secular understanding of it.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I feel like I think I've shared this a lot of time, but I feel like more and more as I look into things and look back, it's just like people are always drawing things back to Christ, whether they know it or not. Like they're always teaching Christ in some way, shape, or form, and it's really interesting. And Stav, maybe you could share, like, have you ever been on a bad team that, maybe the opposite of what Lucas just shared, right? So he has this great experience. He sees what a culture can do. It can change everything. Have you been on a bad team where that's just not true?
I mean, I've for sure been on teams where the culture just isn't there.
Yeah. And
Like,
how does that impact you as a player?
Like I would say my sophomore, junior year. I mean, it was tough. We had kids who didn't want to be there sometimes, kids who weren't trying to play their hardest, you would say. But I mean, personally, me, like you two know, like I'm a very competitive person. I don't like losing at all. So like, and I think that culture really does affect me personally, where I don't have that feeling of, okay, everyone's here for each other. Everyone wants to win. Everyone wants to be successful. And I've for sure been on teams like that where it's affected me. But like nothing like super like bad where, I don't know. I mean, my teams have always had those kind of, what would you say? Foundations that were technically Christ-like. We've always had those foundations, but acting on them is completely different.
Right. And I think, keep going, sorry.
No, yeah, go ahead.
I'm just sitting here and I'm thinking, we have the example of Lucas's really good football team, and maybe not even skill. It was the way that they could come to practice and act. And then you say, maybe you didn't have the worst experiences, but when people weren't bought in all the way, the level of play drops. I'm thinking about this in church, and it's like when you go to a parish that just is so on fire, and you have, especially like for us at our age, when you have kids there and like young adults like our age that you can see like going to church, living the life of the church, like that gets me so jazzed. That makes me want to be a better Christian every single day. And like when I go to other churches, like even my church here, I love my church. We have really good people, but like a lot of my age people don't come. I haven't seen them in years at church. Maybe that's, not calling them out, but that does affect like how I perceive things. It does make me say, oh, like, is this even really working? Is it worth my time right now?
Imagine if like half your offensive line, like or your star receiver, your quarterback, they just didn't show up to practice.
Right. You can't play.
Exactly. Right. How are we supposed to work as a team, as a church or culture, if we don't have, the runners of it? Like a single person can get so much work done.
Yeah.
Imagine if everyone was bought in, the amazing things we could do, not only for our church, but we could take that idea of liturgy after liturgy and extend it if we actually had people like willing and bought into the idea.
Yeah, we could absolutely change the world. And that's what Christ did. He set the world on fire just with 12 people. He did. And it's because they were bought in and because they trusted in him, that he was the Messiah. And just with all of this today, I hope it helps us think a little bit deeper into this, that, maybe we need to first off look at ourselves. Oh, as always, we always have to look at ourselves, but then also look into our own parish and see, are we all bought in? And if we're not, then grab your brothers and sisters in Christ and just pull them in and say, dude, we're doing this. Like, let's get it. And just know that the God's enough and he'll see us through. I hope you all enjoyed this discussion today and took something out of it. And as we go through this next week, just pray for this. Pray that our churches may be set on fire for Christ, with the love of Christ, and that the culture, we'll get there with the culture, and that we'll get there with our love of Christ as a community. And with that, just know that God is enough. We'll see you next time.